Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for spending your lunchtime hour with us today. My name is Gwen Kozlowski with the Urban and Community Forestry Program, a collaborative effort of the Vermont Department of Forest Parks and Recreation and the University of Vermont Extension. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few logistics for this webinar. As participants, your microphones will be muted. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the questions box at the bottom of the GoToWebinar side panel. We will stop to answer questions after each presenter. Now you'll note there are actually two boxes. There's a chat box and a question box. Please direct your questions to the question box. For today's webinar presentation, we have an EAB update for forest pest first detectors. A lot has happened since EAB was first discovered in Vermont in February, and we wanted to give you an opportunity to learn the latest and ask questions. We have two fabulous presenters today, Emily Inouye, the State Survey Coordinator with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, and Meredith Whitney, our Forest Pest Education Coordinator with UVM Extension. Our agenda for this webinar is to cover the story of EAB and the discovery in Vermont with some behind-the-scenes images that Meredith captured, our information about the delineation survey in the current infested area, the federal quarantine now in place and what that means for us, resources available for volunteers, and actions that you can take. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website, vtinvasives.org, as a YouTube video by the end of the day. With that, I'll hand it over to Meredith. Meredith?
Yep, sorry, just unmuting myself. Thank you, Gwen. So I'll just start by telling a little bit of the story, which you may or may not know, about the discovery of emerald ash borer in Vermont. So in February of this year, a consulting forester was revising a management plan on a property in Orange, Vermont, where he saw some suspicious signs and symptoms that looked to him like emerald ash borer. So he sent those photos, submitted them at our Vermont Invasives website, vtinvasives.org, as we hope everyone will do. And the timing was rather fortuitous because when that submission came in, we were having a meeting with the Forest Pest Advisory Committee to update the emerald ash borer action plan for the state of Vermont. So we had representatives from the Agency of Agriculture, the Vermont Department of Forest Parks and Recreation, the USDA APHIS PPQ, the U.S. Forest Service, and UVM Extension, all present at this meeting when we got this submission from Orange. So we took a small group of us, went to the site in Orange, which is where these photos on the screen came from. And we had the pleasure of having Nate Seeger with the U.S. Forest Service. He's an entomologist and probably one of the top experts on EAB in the country. And Nate was with us that day. So he peeled some of the bark back. As you can see, we noticed some of those serpentine galleries distinct to the emerald ash borer. And in addition, we collected some larval samples. And so those larval samples were sent off to the USDA for confirmation. And shortly after, maybe a week, that confirmation came through that we had emerald ash borer in Vermont. And then as moving forward from that, I think that it's somewhere around, there have been maybe 13 outreach events that I myself have delivered. This is to groups like municipalities, just general homeowners, an Across the Fence episode targeted at landowners, school groups, students. So we've reached a broad range of audiences with our outreach efforts to spread the word about emerald ash borer being in Vermont. And perhaps many of you have seen that as well on social media and in the newsletter that Gwen sends out. So I'm going to pass this now to Emily, who will take it to some of the other next steps that the state went through with the process of delimiting the infested area and take it from there. So I'm going to pass it over to Emily.
Emily, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Hey, Emily, we actually can't quite hear you yet. All right, folks, sorry for 1 second. We're just going to try and, this is working. Of course, it worked a couple of minutes ago, but now it doesn't. So, Emily, it looks like you have yourself muted. If you could unmute yourself. So sorry for the inconvenience here. We got to roll with the technology. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, Emily is just working on trying to unmute herself. Of course, it worked a couple of minutes ago. It worked in our, okay, let's see. It didn't work that time. So Emily's gonna call back in. And let's see. So apologies for this. Just 1 second for us to be able to figure out the technology glitch here. In the meantime, Meredith, have any other additional thoughts that you wanted to share about Emerald Ash Borer?
Well, sure, I mean, Emily will talk more, but I can just share a little bit more about the location that it was first identified in, which is the map that you see on the screen right now. And what made it sort of unique where it was first found was that it was just in a part of Orange that was actually so close to the border of the 3 counties, Washington, Caledonia, and Orange County. So that particular location made it very complicated in terms of identifying where it was in the state and how the state would take its next steps from there, which is what Emily will talk about when she's on.
Can you hear me now?
Like she is.
There you are. Perfect.
Hi guys, sorry about that. Yep, I have no idea what happened. I was clicking all the buttons and nothing was happening. So anyway, I'm here, and I'm assuming that the screen sharing is okay, right?
That is correct.
Can everybody see my screen? Okay, so great. I just overheard Meredith talking and telling you guys about where we found it in Orange. It was very close to the border of some of the other towns. And so one of the first things that we wanted to do, just in terms of, trying to figure out how big the scope of infestation was initially, the Department of Forest Parks and Rec kind of led the charge along with Ag to go out and scout the abutting properties that happened to cross over into some of the other towns. And sure enough, Emerald ash borer was confirmed in those properties, which by default meant that, those towns were found to be positive. And we did decide to go by a town-to-town designation status, just because when you start getting so much into the micro scale, it can get really complicated and bog the strategy of delimiting down. So we were kind of going macro, and then decided to, once we get the idea of what the scale of infestation is, kind of work down from there. So pretty quickly, we realized that, there were at least 3 towns to deal with. Nate, who is the foremost expert of EAB in the area, had a strong suspicion that we would find it in other places. And the only way that we could actually do that is to go ahead and conduct the delimiting survey. And there are a lot of different ways to do this. There are ways that you can set up transects or go actual by, you can actually see the squares on the screen right now. Those are mile squares. So each of those is, a mile in each direction. And we could have gone to each square and done, a pretty intensive survey that way. What we ended up doing is utilizing teams. I want to give props to Forest Parks and Recreation here. They staffed the survey teams heavily for this, but we had teams that went out to different towns over the course of about 2 weeks to figure out and identify ash trees, to see if they could find any suspicious ash trees, and then to report back. So what ended up happening is we ended up with a lot of, I guess, questionable ash trees, where the crews coming in from the towns, and they would primarily, this is a windshield survey, the groups would go out with a GPS unit and drive along major arterial roads of the town and basically find ash trees while driving, do a visual survey of the tree, and if it indicated that it was potentially infested by, looking for symptoms such as epicormic sprouting, woodpecker flecking, all those things, they would actually mark it in the ArcMap program and then bring it back. And what we ended up doing is there was a follow-up inspection team made up of a handful of us who are comfortable enough with going out to these trees to do a closer inspection of the trees to determine whether or not they actually were positive. So you can imagine this took a little bit of time, but this was a priority, so we did get everything wrapped up relatively quickly. Over the course of about 3 weeks, we were able to follow up all of these little spots, hot spots, and come to a determination that there was only one spot that somebody went out to that was positive for EAB, and that was in Barrie. So just a quick stat rundown of what we actually did as the state. We surveyed a total of 11 towns. There were over 376 data points taken of ash trees, of the areas where crews were out on. The actual ash trees that were found to be symptomatic amounted to about 130. And of those, they indicated that, the follow-up team should go there right now because it's of high concern to us. There were 35 of those. We went out and visited, and like I said, the only one that turned out to be positive was in Barrie. So we were able to add one town as a result of the Delimiting Survey, and that was helpful. All the other towns, the remaining towns, were negative. I'm going to talk a little bit more just to add on to this. We did end up adding Montpelier as an EAB positive town. It was a couple months after the initial find. We did find it in Montpelier. Somebody called it in. FPR took down the tree and did some destructive sampling and did find emerald ash borer larvae on it. So as of right now, Montpelier joins the other 4 towns. So the towns that are positive in Vermont right now, to list them off, are Orange, Plainfield, Groton, Washington, Barrie, and Montpelier. And those 5 towns are located in 3 counties, and they include Orange County, Washington County, and Caledonia County. So the next step that we had to figure out is, what do we do about any quarantine decisions? And this was a pretty intensive discussion between USDA, APHIS, AG, and FPR. It was an interesting conversation. We had several options. We had the option of implementing a state-specific quarantine that would encompass the counties that were infested, or we could go statewide. And statewide, and this gets down into the weeds a little bit, but ultimately we ended up deciding to not implement a state quarantine, and we defaulted to the larger federal quarantine. The feds, by default, will just, if there's an emerald ash borer confirmation in a state, will basically quarantine the entire state, regardless of county. And that is what we decided to do after a lot of discussion, because we decided our resources would be better spent on outreach and education. It's a sad reality, but we don't have the money, the personnel, or the resources to go out and monitor and police the counties that are known to be infested, to make sure people aren't moving stuff out of there. So we really wanted to get the buy-in from the public and industry folks as well. The statewide or the federal quarantine does kind of glom us on to the remaining 31 other states. You can see it on your screen now. The whole areas that are outlined in red are areas that have been designated as, basically potentially EAB infested. The movement of ash material within that yellow area is allowed. We do not have any state-specific laws or regulations right now prohibiting the movement of ash anywhere in the state. That being said, we have come up with some recommendations. Before I move on to that, I just want to touch on the areas that the federal quarantine does impact in terms of our neighboring states. On the map, you can see that parts of New Hampshire and Maine are still considered EAB negative. Since the creation of this map, actually, emerald ash borer was detected way up in the northern tip of Maine. So there is a county, it's a large county in Maine, Aroostook County, that is considered EAB positive right now, but for all intents and purposes, the rest of Maine is still not under quarantine. So ash movement is prohibited outside of Vermont or outside of any of the red outlined areas into the counties in New Hampshire that aren't considered infested or that are white, and into most of Maine. So if people do want to move ash into New Hampshire and Maine right now, they do need to contact our federal counterparts. The state does not regulate that. The folks at USDA, APHIS, PPQ do. And the lead on that, his name is Tony Slowick, and his information is on the bottom there for anybody on the call right now who might be interested in moving ash to parts of New Hampshire or Maine. This just gives you a little bit of a closer regional look at what we're looking at in terms of the quarantine. And you can see way up north there, that big giant county in the northern section is Aroostook County, and EAB was identified there a little while ago. This kind of gives you a look at what our recommendations are. The Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation did come up with a pretty comprehensive list of recommendations. Again, I want to reiterate, this isn't law, but we really do highly suggest people follow them in an effort to mitigate the spread of emerald ash borer. The areas that are in red, we are considering to be infested with emerald ash borer. Meredith's going to talk a little bit about the resources that are available and where you can find the recommendations, but there are specific recommendations that we're suggesting for this red area of the map. The yellow area is considered to be high risk, and there are recommendations and suggestions that we would like people to follow ideally if you're in any of these high risk or infested areas. And I just want to note here that this map is fluid and dynamic. It's not set in stone. Obviously, as we find more infestations around the state, this map will change as well, which by default is going to have an impact on where the recommendations should be applied. So we are still following up on phone calls and reports made through VT invasives for anybody reporting on any suspicious EAB finds. We are encouraging that. We appreciate that. We fully anticipate over the next couple of years the scope of infestation is going to grow to our knowledge, and we just really still need people out there looking for it and alerting us to anything that we may not be out there finding. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Meredith.
Right, before we do that, I'm just going to interject and let's take a moment to pause for questions for Emily. So we just heard about the pros and cons of the state quarantine and then how the decision was made to get there. Does anyone have any specific questions about that process? Meredith will cover some of the documents that Emily mentioned that to help minimize the spread of emerald ash borer. So I'll give you guys a minute or so to type in your questions. In the meantime, we did receive one from Stephen Farnham. And this was a little bit ago when it had the map, and he asked what the squares in the map showed, and that was Emily covered the 1 mile squares to help identify survey areas. Are there any other questions about the quarantine? All right, so another 30 seconds or so in case folks are typing away. All right, and we could come back. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in and we'll answer them in a few minutes. So with that, Meredith, go ahead.
I'm not entirely sure that my screen is sharing at this moment.
Oh, yeah, Emily, can you pass it back? Perfect.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to take you on a little bit of a tour of some of the resources that are available for you or anyone else in your community that is interested in learning more about the emerald ash borer or what you can do to help spread the word about the pest. So the very first place to go, of course, is our website, Vermont Invasives, or vtinvasives.org. And if you are on the home page and it looks more or less like it does here, you can scroll down to this little button that says Emerald Ash Borer Updates with these 3 bugs on it. And when you click on this, and hopefully I didn't prep my internet as Gwen recommended that I do, so hopefully it won't take 100 years. But this sort of landing page is all things emerald ash borer in Vermont. There will be a ton of text here. There will be an image of that kind of egg-shaped infested area that we saw in Emily's PowerPoint presentation, and then some other links to videos and pictures. But the things that I would like especially to draw your attention to, first, there's some odd feedback while I'm speaking. I'm not sure if it's possible to have every presenter muted while I'm talking, but anyway, thank you. Okay, that might help. So if you look on the left-hand menu on this Emerald Ash Borer page, there are 2 things that I wanted to call attention to. The first is called Slow the Spread of EAB, and this tab is where you will find all of the documents that the state of Vermont has put out, the best management practices regarding that infested area that Emily showed in her PowerPoint presentation. So each of these bullet items on this page are documents that cover those best management practices, things like moving ash from the infested area, ash processing options, information for forest landowners if you're actively managing forest land, the recommendations from the state, tree care and clearing. And then the last one on the list is the insecticide treatment options. And I wanted to call specific attention to this document because I have been getting a lot of questions from homeowners who have maybe 1 to 5 ash trees on their property that they are considering treatment for. And I feel like this is kind of a hot topic right now. So this document is really useful in that it walks you through sort of the steps to decide if you want to treat your tree. And then at the very bottom, it also gives the recommendations that the state is giving for what insecticides to use, how you can go about hiring a certified arborist to apply those insecticides, and kind of the pros and cons on that. So this is a great document if you are looking at sharing something with people in your community. That would be something that I would recommend doing for sure. Going back now to the left-hand column here, we were just in the tab called Slow the Spread of EAB, and then the next one would be called Emerald Ash Borer Resources. And this tab is a little bit more specific to individual audiences, and so we have resources for different user groups. There will be resources for homeowners, and of course, homeowners and forest landowners may be one and the same, but some people don't necessarily own a lot of forests that they're managing. So the information for homeowners would be more specific to like single tree management, like insecticides. The forest landowners tab will be management for those. The municipalities tab is another one I wanted to call out because the Vermont Urban and Community Forestry Program has put together resources for community planning. And if you were to click on this link on this page right here, it would take you to this website. This is the Vermont Urban and Community Forestry's Emerald Ash Borer Management webpage. And this is where you would find resources for writing a management plan. There's actually a worksheet that you can go through. There are examples of existing preparedness or management plans from other Vermont towns, examples from other states. It kind of walks you through some steps here. There's a lot of resources for completing inventories of roadside ash, if it's in an urban area or rural roadside ash inventories. Not only is there information on this website, but the Vermont Urban and Community Forestry team is available to offer technical assistance in executing those inventories and those surveys. And then there are a bunch of other resources kind of buried at the bottom of this, including this flyer that's the checklist for cities and towns, which would be a great thing to print out if you're attending a public meeting or select board meeting, or you just want to get things kicked off. And then it also has more resources that go a little bit deeper into the weeds. And then the very last thing on this website, on the VT Invasives website, if we're going back to that I wanted to call attention to would be the tab for volunteers at the bottom. And here we, Gwen and I have been updating this with resources that you can use in your communities. So we have a 10-minute video on the Emerald Ash Borer signs and symptoms. It kind of watches like a webinar. It's sort of a recorded PowerPoint. And then we have that PowerPoint presentation itself, if you felt like you would like to give that. We have the corresponding notes, and I'm also happy to help answer any questions before you might give a PowerPoint presentation in your community. We have a fun kind of whiteboard-styled animation video. It's 2 minutes long about keeping Vermont woods beautiful and healthy by not moving firewood. This is great to share on social media, or if you have a website and it fits in nicely. We also have written some Front Porch Forum posts that are examples that you could share in your community or other social media posts. We have some language for those. And then a couple of posters, one that says pack marshmallows, not firewood, and the classic don't bring firewood into Vermont poster, of which I have oodles of those. So if you're in the market for one of those, let me know. But the pack marshmallows, not firewood is a PDF, and you can print that off and have a display in your town. So this kind of leads me, that was more sort of a quick tour of the resources that are on the Vermont Invasives website. There are many more than the ones that I highlighted. But if I were to kind of pull apart or pull out some action items that you could take with the information that you know about emerald ash borer and how you might be able to share it with your community, there are these three major areas if you're interested. The first would be sharing information with your select board, which could be really intimidating. It could also be sharing those resources on the Vermont Community Forestry website, but it could be using that 10-minute pre-recorded video or giving a PowerPoint presentation. Printing and distributing both posters and flyers. All of the posters that were under that volunteer tab would be great. And then any of those documents that were under the Slow the Spread of EAB tab are also wonderful to just have available. And we've had folks hand these out at like town meetings, and then some other towns have pulled together kind of impromptu public meetings about emerald ash borer where they've shared this information. And then the last thing to do, it will never get old to spread the word about not moving firewood. It's just really important that people know how easily insects can travel in firewood. So sharing that animated whiteboard style video on social media, or writing a post on Front Porch Forum in your community would be excellent ways to help spread that word and slow the spread of emerald ash borer. So that's what I have.
Great, thank you, Meredith. That was a really great rundown of all the resources that we have available. And this is like Meredith said, this keeps growing. New documents keep coming out, and they keep getting updated with more information. So as we get more familiar with things rolling, please visit VT Invasives for case studies. I mean, there's a recent article from the Valley News that we posted on VT Invasives that really runs down a great, what that community is doing in preparation. So highly recommend checking out the website for more information about what to do and how to move forward. So let's visit some questions. I think we've kind of covered the content that we wanted to cover. So we'll...
Hey, Gwen?
Yes.
Gwen? Hi,
Go ahead.
this is Emily. I wanted to correct myself, and I apologize. I erroneously stated that we had found emerald ash borer in the town of Washington. That isn't the case. It has been found in the county of Washington. The 5 towns that I listed are Orange, Plainfield, Groton, Berry, and Montpelier. And I think I just listed Washington as part of that, and that is not true.
Thank you. I was writing down those towns and I missed one. So I missed the Washington one. So I missed that part. Thank you for correcting that. All right, so we've got 2 questions. Patricia had asked if there will be an email with links to the video and links mentioned. Yes, this webinar is being recorded, and I will send it out to folks that had RSVP'd, and I will also list it on VT Invasives as a resource. And Stephen had asked, is there a time of year during which I can cut and split ash into firewood that will optimize the likeliness that any larva in it will die rather than mature and emerge from my wood pile?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And well, the default answer is yes, but we would rather you obviously not move firewood very far at all. But we would say if you want to take it down and split it, let's see, it would be like during the late fall and winter, the insects are not dying. I mean, are not coming out at all. They're hibernating. But they have done studies where some firewood, even if it's left on site, insects can emerge up to a couple years afterwards. So honestly, I would say just, even if it's now when they're feeding, if they're not moving the firewood, taking them down now does take away a significant food source for them. And it just kind of helps the drying out process. We just ask that you don't move it.
All right. Any other follow-up questions about anything EAB related? We've got some great experts here, so take a few minutes to type in your questions, because otherwise we will wrap up shortly. It's a weird thing to be sitting at my computer right now, just staring out into the distance, hoping folks are out there. So if you have any other follow-up questions, we can, I'll send out Meredith Whitney and Emily Inouye's contact information as well. But with that, I just want to thank Emily and Meredith for their time and expertise. And oh, there is another question from Patricia. Are there any native Vermont beetles that look like EAB?
I think it depends on who you
pull up a picture.
Yeah, while Meredith is pulling it up, I would say people who are familiar with insect identification would say probably there aren't too many, but the calls and the reports that we get in make it abundantly clear that, yeah, it is really easy to mistake several different pests, and there are a couple of the usual suspects that you're going to see here in a second on Meredith's screen. I would say that the one that we get the most calls about is an insect called the six-spotted tiger beetle, and we get a couple of those a week, and that ends up, there it is, that's the six-spotted tiger beetle. It is a ground or a ground beetle, so it's actually a good insect that you want in your gardens because they prey on a lot of the pests that you don't want in your gardens. What's unfortunate is a lot of people see the emerald color running around on the ground and then promptly either stomp it or grab it and say, I found it. So the general rule of thumb here that I suggest is, you know, if it's running on the ground, I would be very comfortable saying it's not emerald ash borer. The six-spotted tiger beetle is also a lot larger than an emerald ash borer. It's not going to fit on a penny, so there are significant differences there. I really honestly have no idea why a cicada is listed on this sheet, but there are some people that I guess have mistaken cicadas for emerald ash borer, which is awesome. Actually, I think that's hilarious. So anyway, so you can see that. Go ahead, Meredith.
Oh, sorry, Emily. I would just also add that I know that some of my colleagues and a couple of the reports that have come in recently have been the metallic wood borer, which is that kind of large green insect in the top row of this image, and that's another one that is showing up as a common lookalike.
Yeah, and that one's, you know, when people find it, it's actually kind of neat to increase our collection anyway. So the metallic wood borer is in the same family as the emerald ash borer. It is a buprestid, or what we call a jewel beetle. You kind of can see the same kind of bullet-shaped, similar shape of those insects. So yeah, I'm surprised that people can actually find those, but I guess if you're looking, you can find all sorts of things.
All right, we have one other question from Alice. What can towns do about roadside ash trees right now before EAB might be detected?
That is the $100 question. So the best thing before emerald ash borer is detected for towns to do is to just be aware of kind of what you're looking at. How much roadside ash is there? So we recommend doing some kind of an inventory, either a sampling of a small portion of the town or, you know, the whole town, depending on what you have the capacity for. And while inventorying, one of our tools allows you to kind of rate the condition of the trees that you're looking at. So knowing that a tree that is already in stress is going to be a more likely host to the emerald ash borer. and will obviously need to be removed sooner than a healthier tree. So kind of identifying the risk of the community. And then if those roadside ash trees are more like kind of boulevard trees or in town greens, there is that option to use insecticide treatments, which some Vermont towns, I know Hartford and Montpelier, have already posted articles that they're considering insecticide use. It's not realistic on a kind of larger scale, like in a forest, but if there are some token trees, a community has the option to think about using insecticide.
Great, thank you, Meredith. I think that was our last question. And I will email out our contact information at the end of the webinar. And with that, I just want to thank again Emily and Meredith for their time today, and for all of you for joining us and bringing your questions. So stay tuned, stay informed, and share information about what we can do to help slow the spread of emerald ash borer. Thank you very much, and have a great day.